The Steam Deck has become one of my favorite ways to play games over the last few years. It combines the flexibility of the PC with a console-like experience and all in the form factor of a handheld. You can play almost anything on it, but there is one genre that I've noticed doesn't get much love on the Steam Deck, and that's the MMO. These are actually some of my favorite and most played games, so I've decided to put that to the test. In this video, I've tested out 6 of the biggest MMOs to see if you can play them on the Steam Deck. Can you turn this handheld into an MMO machine? Let's find out. So we're starting with the Elder Scrolls Online, and I actually tested this first because honestly I thought it would be one of the easiest. It's on Steam, it has a console release, but actually it turned out that I was kind of wrong and it took a little while to actually get it going. First of all, you do install this through Steam, but be prepared that it's a massive install file. It's over 100 gigabytes and it will take a long time. Not exactly a difficult step, it'll just take a while. Once it's installed and you click play, there is a launcher, the ZeniMax launcher, and that actually asks you to install ZeniMax Online. But weirdly, that happened pretty much instantaneously and then it just closed and I had to relaunch. At this point though, it does another gigantic install once you're actually in the launcher.
Alright, I'm sorry if the audio isn't as good. I've not got my microphone plugged in, but look out. So I've just installed Elder Scrolls Online through Steam. It just did a 100 gigabyte download on Steam. And once you get into the launcher, it actually then it wants you to do another 100 gigabyte install. It says 93 now, but it started at 100 gigabytes. So yeah, just be prepared. There is a lot of installing if you want to play this game.
Eventually you get through all of this. My tip for this game, and then actually for most of these games, is that once you're in, set the right trackpad to act as a mouse with left click on the button press. This helps you just to navigate some of these launchers. It works pretty well. Touch controls do work, but sometimes you just need those finer controls that are a bit similar to a mouse. So at this point it's all installed, I'm logged in. I thought that I was pretty much sorted, but once I got to the main menu there was no UI during character select at all. I couldn't click anything, I couldn't progress past this point. It was really strange. I spent quite a lot of time actually trying to find a solution for this. Somebody suggested compatibility mode, but toggling that didn't work, and actually the solution in the end was weirdly just to let it time out. You just stayed on that screen with no UI for about 5 minutes and eventually it would time out and it would log you out. It logs you out and it prompts you to log back in, and then when you log back in the UI is there and it's actually there going forward. The problem doesn't replicate itself again. That means that finally we were able to play. So once you actually get through all that, once you're in the game, it works really well on Steam Deck because the game is on console, so it has a good controller layout. Character creation, combat, menu navigation, they're all pretty comfortable to do on a controller. Once you're in game, the default graphics settings are just set to low. That's what they were for me, but I actually found that I could turn them all the way up to high and still be at 60 FPS most of the time. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. One final tip on this game is that it's a good idea to close the launcher once you're in game, and that's just to save you a bit of resources, just to try and keep that FPS as steady as possible. So overall, Elder Scrolls Online, it was a bit of an ordeal to actually get into the game, but once you're in, it works great. I actually enjoyed playing through the tutorial. ESO is not one of the MMOs that I've played a great deal of, so I'm actually going to leave this one installed on my Steam Deck and I'm going to be trying out some of the other classes. Those small issues at the start aside, all in all, Elder Scrolls Online seems to work great on Steam Deck. Have a go with this one if you're interested. I think you'll have a great time. The next game I tested was RuneScape. Now, I of course played RuneScape back in the day when everybody played RuneScape, but these days I only have a little look every now and then. You can also download this game straight from Steam and it's not a very big download at all. A few gigabytes, don't worry too much about that. Now, RuneScape actually launched okay for me. It does take a little while. This lady stays on the screen for quite a long time. You're gonna be looking at her a lot, but eventually it asks you to create an account or link an already existing one, and you can navigate this section with the trackpad or the touchscreen. But then once we're in RuneScape, that is the tricky bit. The game is not designed with a controller in mind at all. It's just a PC game. Now, there are some community layouts ready to go, and they do the best that they can, but the very nature of the game is always going to make this tricky. RuneScape is very mouse dependent. The controller configuration that I had by default has left stick controlling the camera and right stick moving the mouse, and then you click with the left and right triggers. Left trackpad is then on a radial menu to access some other stuff. I actually found this controller layout really strange to get used to. Left stick controlling the camera just feels wrong after years of playing games where it's actually right stick that controls the camera movement. After a bit of messing around with the controls, I really couldn't make it much better though. I did try swapping the joysticks so that the left stick moved the mouse and the right stick moved the camera, but in the end I found that weird too, and I kind of settled on the best layout being switching that back so that the left stick is on the camera and then use the right trackpad as a mouse. And if you think about it, when you're playing RuneScape on a computer with the mouse and keyboard, it's kind of this way around, isn't it? The mouse is on the right hand side and then you use WASD to move the camera. And so those two things being at least controlled with the same hand felt like it made a little bit more sense to me. And then you use the left and right click on the triggers. I do have to say that I think if you're going to use something to act as the mouse, make it the trackpad and not a joystick. One of the key benefits of the Steam Deck to me is those trackpads and how they work as a mouse. Once you get used to the trackpad, it's so good to use them as a mouse. Those things are great. So, take the time to try and at least get used to using the trackpad as a mouse instead of the joystick. It's much more accurate. You can be quicker with it once you get used to it. So overall, I think technically it is possible to play RuneScape on the Steam Deck. And performance-wise, the game does run pretty well. It's just those controls that make it pretty tricky. And I think for me, I wouldn't want to play it on the Steam Deck. Maybe if you were just planning on doing a load of woodcutting while watching TV or something like that, I could see that working. That makes sense to me, but nothing too demanding. You couldn't do like a load of bosses or something like that. Touchscreen controls do work like a mouse as well, so that might help you a little bit, but overall it's just going to be much harder to play RuneScape on Steam Deck than playing it on a mouse and keyboard like you would on PC. Next up, we're testing Guild Wars 2, and we're starting to get into the MMOs that I have spent a lot of time with now. Guild Wars 2 used to be one of my favorites. The action camera, the spell targeting, the way that questing and interacting with the world worked, it was very different when it came out. I had a great time with it. Back when I played Guild Wars 2, you had to download it from ArenaNet's website, but these days you can download it straight from Steam, and that download is just under 80 gigabytes. If, like me, you have an Arena account already with characters that are already there, and you want to be able to play that through Steam, then you have to do a little bit of configuration to get that to work. So you just go into game settings, properties, launch options, and then you type --provider space portal, and that should allow you to log into your ArenaNet. So when you launch the game, ArenaNet's launcher will pop up. This launcher isn't too tricky to navigate with touchscreen controls and the on-screen keyboard, and it'll allow you to log in with your Arena account if you've done the step that I did. Otherwise, it'll probably ask you to create an account. Once logged in, Guild Wars 2 does actually then ask you to do further downloads and updates, but thankfully Guild Wars 2 is one of those games that will let you launch while it does downloads in the background, so you don't have to wait for a second download to complete, and then you can just get into the game. The trouble that I had with Guild Wars 2 is the same trouble that I had with RuneScape, and it all comes down to the controls.
Okay, so we're into Guild Wars 2. It actually launched okay, and the control scheme to start with is a bit weird. So the right joystick moves the mouse, which is kind of what I was expecting, but what I wasn't expecting is the left joystick actually moves the character around, and then some buttons do things. So like menu works, and then this opens your inventory, and then you can jump, but then it's kind of only some, as far as I can tell, only some skills might work. So I'm going to have a little look and just see what's going on with this, see if we can get a better control scheme.
I did manage to set up an action cam where I bound the capacitive touch on the right joystick to right click, and then moving the right joystick to act as mouse movement. And then what that does is it kind of, as you pan the joystick around, it does move it like an action cam. On the whole though, button mapping is very complicated. If you're really dedicated to playing Guild Wars 2 on Steam Deck, then I think you could do it, you could figure it out. I think for a lot of people this might end up being a bit too tricky, and I'm not sure that I'd want to play Guild Wars 2 this way either. Even with getting that action cam set up, it was still quite hard to play. Aiming was a bit difficult, and anything where you had to actually place area of effect skills was really tough to get down. Also, even if you do get a good set of key bindings, the UI in game is still going to show you all of the PC controls, unfortunately, because it's just not set up to work with a controller, and we're kind of working around that where we can. On the whole, if you're a huge Guild Wars 2 fan, you might be able to get this working. I'm just not sure that it's the best way to play. I think that's a shame, because I think Guild Wars 2 itself as a game would lend itself really well to the Steam Deck. So if there's ever an official control scheme for a gamepad or maybe a mod, then that would be amazing. I would jump right on that. So the next game we're testing is Final Fantasy XIV. So you can download this game straight from Steam. I was pretty confident about this one because it got a PS4 and now PS5 release. The Steam download itself is very small, but then the launcher download is pretty big. We're talking nearly 80 gigabytes. The good news about this launcher download is that if you cancel partway through to play something else, for example, it will know where you left off, and you will be able to pick up again after doing, say, 20 gigabytes or 40 40 gigabytes or something like that. A word of warning that you might run into this issue: Square Enix are super careful with your account, and I suppose that's a good thing, but it can be a bit annoying. So I'd forgotten my password, so I had to go through the account recovery process, which is fairly in-depth by itself, but then I actually got locked out again, and it's because it said it was suspicious activity. I think maybe because I was playing on a different device, so then I had to go and change my password again. So it was a bit of a faff, really. Just watch out for that. You might have to do that a few times. Now, in case you don't know, Final Fantasy XIV has a really big trial offering, which includes several of the expansions, and you could probably get hundreds of hours out of this game without subscribing. The downside, if you've previously subscribed or you've paid for an expansion before on the account that you link to Steam, well, then you will have to subscribe again. Sadly, I had to pay for a month to sort of get to try it on this video. Once you've completed the download and you've set up your account, launching the game, it just mostly works. When you first launch it, asks to calibrate your controller, but weirdly then it does still need a bit of touchscreen and mouse controls to first get into the gameplay, and it turns out that you need to go into settings and into character configuration to toggle between mouse mode and gamepad mode. I actually had to look this up. I went through loads of different settings, but I just never thought to go into the character configuration because I just didn't think it would be in there. You know, that seemed like it would be other stuff in that settings. Once you toggle that though, and you toggle into gamepad mode, the UI completely changes. The start menu becomes easier to navigate with a controller. Your skill bars change. You now activate skills with a combination of the triggers and the face buttons, and I think this works really well. Just please ignore my terrible gameplay. I could not remember how to play this class at all, but it's a lot of fun to play. Final Fantasy XIV Online was one of the easier ones to set up and get going, and it works really well on Steam Deck. There's also loads and loads of content here, so I think you could play this game for hundreds of hours on Steam Deck. World of Warcraft is the MMO that I have played the most over the years. It's pretty much always installed on something in my house, and I've been subscribed for years on and off. Of all the games in this video, World of Warcraft is actually the one that I already had installed on my Steam Deck. I've already tried out how to get it running on here. Fair warning, this one is quite tricky to set up, but once you get through that process, it works pretty well. Firstly, there is of course no Steam download for World of Warcraft, no native Linux version, so to even get the game installed, we need a workaround. There's a few methods of doing this. I use the non-Steam launchers application that you can find on GitHub. If you download this, it will help you install Battle.net, and you can actually use it for other launchers too, but I've just only ever tried it with Battle.net. Non-Steam launchers is a really good application when it works, but in my experience it can be a little bit temperamental. It's supposed to install Battle.net and then add it automatically as a non-Steam game for you, but it doesn't always seem to do that right away, and I can't really tell you what it is that eventually makes it work. I just end up having to go through a process of retries and restarts of the Steam Deck, and then eventually it's added on there. I did run into another weird issue this time, which was that Battle.net did not want to update. It just kept ticking around for a very long time, and this seems to be a more recent issue. The fix that I eventually found was to switch to Proton 10. There's a beta of Proton 10 at the moment that you can use, and from there that works fine. You can get into the launcher and download the game as you normally would. The touchscreen works, but I like to set up the right trackpad as mouse with left click on the press like I've mentioned before, and this will actually be extra handy later when we get into the game. So once you've installed World of Warcraft, the game will launch fine, but the controls will not work at all. World of Warcraft has no gamepad support. You can do things with a trackpad, but that's not really ideal, and so to play this I use a mod called Console Port, which works very much like the controller scheme from Final Fantasy XIV, which we just talked about. Now, to get the mod, I personally use the CurseForge application. It just makes things a little easier than doing it all manually. CurseForge thankfully has a Linux version, so you can just download it from the website, and while you're doing that, grab any other mods you would like. I also enjoy using Immersion for playing with a controller. That kind of like changes how quest giving looks and things like that. It's pretty nice. An extra tip for when you're installing World of Warcraft is to make sure to change it from the default location of installing and instead create a new top level folder for World of Warcraft to install in. Then if you do download CurseForge, put the program image here. Otherwise it can be hard for CurseForge to locate the game files, because the Steam Deck honestly stores things really weird if you don't mess around and configure it yourself. Now, Console Port is really good. It can take a little bit to get used to, but on the whole, almost everything that you would do in game is covered somehow, and it's mostly intuitive how to play. Right click is on the R3 press, which is good for interacting with quest givers. The game auto targets enemies as you pan around with an action camera, and abilities are on those combinations of face buttons and the triggers, just like Final Fantasy XIV. Some of the controls are a bit weird, like opening opening the map or zooming in and out or on different combinations of triggers and start and select, that kind of thing. It can be a bit weird, but give it some time and you will be able to get used to it. If this is your first time playing World of Warcraft, you will have to create a character with the mouse controls using the trackpad and then actually enter the name of your character with the Steam Deck keyboard. But on the whole, that isn't too tricky to do. And again, if it is your first time and you're going through tutorial, some of the tutorial windows can't seem to be selected using the console port to dismiss them. So you have to use the trackpad for that. But once you've got through that, you're good to go. Now, I mentioned that some features are really nice and easy and some stuff is a bit trickier to do with the controller. And that's why I like having that right trackpad as a mouse just to help out a little bit. You can hover the mouse over things to get more info, or you can use it to drag stuff around, drag your skills onto different action bars. And really between these two control types, the gamepad and a little extra help with the trackpad, you can get most things done and just have a great time exploring around Azeroth. I maybe wouldn't use it for anything particularly hard like mythic dungeons or raids or any grouped content because typing is still really hard, but you can play a lot of solo stuff absolutely fine. I mean, it's even possible after a little bit of trying to get the hang of Dragonflight on a gamepad, which I didn't think I would say. I've played quite a lot of hours on World of Warcraft on Steam Deck, and if you're wondering about World of Warcraft Classic, this process works exactly the same for Classic. Just install Classic instead of Retail WoW, and then make sure you're getting the Classic WoW version of console port, and then basically the same steps apply and it should work. So World of Warcraft is probably the trickiest one in this entire video to actually get working, but once you're in, it's a lot of fun to play. I can attest to that because I've already played countless hours of World of Warcraft on Steam Deck. So if you're interested in playing this game portably, have a go. I'm sure you have a great time once you get it installed. And the last MMO we're trying in this video is New World. Amazon's MMO sold really well when it first came out, and I played it for I think over 100 hours, but eventually just kind of lost interest. To my surprise, New World was probably the easiest one to get going. I basically had zero issues playing this game. First of all, you can just install via Steam. There's no launcher and it has native gamepad controls right away, and even character creation is fine to get through using a controller. The only slight downside to New World is that being the newest of these games, it does struggle to run even with all the graphics settings turned down low. So in the end, I did turn on FSR, set that to performance. It does make the visuals a bit worse. It makes them a bit muddy, a bit blurry, but it helps you to get a fairly decent frame rate. There actually really isn't a lot for me to say about this one because it does just work so well. It's a solid choice if you want to play an MMO on Steam Deck and you don't want to have a lot of faff of getting things set up. The combat feels good with the controller. I had a pretty good time in the tutorial, and I even got out into the main world to test things out because I was a bit concerned about the frame rate dropping further in the main world. It was fine on this beach where you wash up in. I'd be a little bit concerned about it in a built-up area, and I think you might struggle with bigger PvP battles if those are still a thing, but you could definitely do some grinding of skills here on Steam Deck. So yeah, if you're interested in New World, give this one a go. It's great to get into. So overall, I actually think this experiment was a success. You can play a lot of these MMOs on Steam Deck, maybe not so much RuneScape and Guild Wars 2 just because of those control issues, but if you're really dedicated to playing those games, I'm sure you could figure out a community layout that works for you. One other thing I noticed with some of these games that work via launchers, if you uninstall them through Steam, it doesn't always uninstall the entire game, it just uninstalls the launcher, so you might have to go into the files and manually delete those yourselves. That happened with Final Fantasy 14, but for example, it didn't happen with Guild Wars 2. On the whole though, I think the answer is yes, you can play MMOs on Steam Deck, which just adds to how many options this handheld gives you. I really hope you found this video useful and interesting. If you did, please do like and subscribe, that really helps out. And let me know what you think of MMOs on Steam Deck down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.